Yeah, hi. This is Arpit Gupta, and I'll be your trainer for RHCSA, right? So, before starting the class, let me just tell you about the RHCSA course, right? RHCSA stands for Red Hat Certified System Administrator. After completing the RHCSA course, you'll be able to qualify the RHCSA exam held by the Red Hat, and after qualifying the exam, you can be work as a Linux system administrator, right? You'll be having the basic knowledge of Linux, that how can we use Linux, right? That why we use Linux and how can we use Linux. So after completing the course, you'll be enlightened with the basic concepts of Linux, and not only the basic concepts, some advanced concepts and some advanced tools you'll also be getting. Right. So this is basically an introductory class. This is the first class of your RACSA course. The those students who took admission for this course uh, will be getting benefited by me, by my training experience. Uh, I have more than 3 years of experience in as a Linux trainer. I have worked as a corporate Linux trainer for a company, and since 3 to 4 years, I have been working as a trainer by myself. Yeah. So so okay. So let's get started. The first class of RHCSA. So this is the introductory class. This is the beginning class of the RHCSA course. So in this class, we will be discussing about the Linux, that why we use Linux, and what is the importance of Linux, and what is Red Hat, what is Linux, and all these things. Okay, so our objectives would be like let me just type here. Our objectives would be what is Linux. We'll be discussing about the Linux, and why Linux, right? And what is Red Hat, okay? And something more topics will be covered in this class. Right, so let's get started. Okay, so first question I want to ask you people, that what is Linux according to you? Actually, I have asked this same question to many students, and the same answer I got from all of them who are about the Linux. Right? I got the common answer from all of the students, right? And the answer was, I asked them that what is Linux, so they answered me that Linux is an operating system. I guess uh, you also think that Linux is an operating system. Okay, so for the instance, let's assume that Linux is an operating system. Okay, so I'm saying Linux is an operating system. This is the simple definition of Linux in the word, that Linux is an operating system, right? Okay, so let's assume that this definition is correct, and this is the simplest definition of Linux you'll ever heard. Okay, so let's assume Linux is an operating system. Fine. Now, now I would like to add some more word in this definition, some more technical word in this definition. I'd say Linux is an operating system, right? Linux is an, I would say, open source operating system. Now what does open source mean? Right, I'm adding here, if you have ever searched about the Linux, then you must get this word, open source. Right. So now I'll just explain you what the open source mean. Right. What open source refers to. Look, what what does open source means? Open source means, see, every application, every softwares is is used to write in some codes. Every software is written in, maybe in C language, C++, Java, or something, or with something other language, right? So those codes of that application is called source codes. Source codes, right? So every applications has some source codes, right? So open source means that we can read those source codes, we can copy those source codes, and we can modify and those source codes, and after that distribute we can distribute that those source codes after modifying them, right? So this is the meaning of open source. We can read, we can copy, we can modify those source codes, and all this we can do is legal. This all is legal, right? So Linux is an open source. If I talk about Windows, then I can say that Windows is the closed source. Windows don't allow me to copy their source code. If I copy their source codes, then it may be illegal, right? So Windows doesn't allow me to copy the source codes of their operating system. But on the other hand, uh, Linux allow me to copy the source codes with the legality, right? So we can copy the source codes of Linux, and we can modify those source codes, and we can distribute the application uh, which will be getting after modifying those source codes, right? So in nutshell, the source code the open source simple means that we can read, write, or modify, or copy and modify those source codes, and we can distribute. Finally, after modifying those source codes, we can distribute that application to some other people, right? So this is the open source means. And then those other people also can read the source codes of my application. They can also copy the source codes of that application which I have given to them, and after copying, if they want, then if they see any error in that application, if they see any difficulty in that application, or if they see any drawback in that application, then they can modify that application on their own, and they can distribute further to some other people. So this is the concept of open source, right? Yeah. So I hope you all are clear with the open source term. Okay, third thing which I would like to add I said Linux is an operating system. Okay. I said Linux is an open source operating system. Now I'll say Linux is not an operating system. What? What does it mean? If if it is not an operating system, then what is it? Right? This question must be in your mind, that if Linux is not an operating system, then what the Linux is? Now I'll write the correct definition of Linux. And in this definition, I'll introduce a new word, that Linux is a kernel. Now again, a question must be arise in your head, that what the kernel is, what the meaning of the term kernel, right? Okay, so now I'll explain that what the kernel is. Kernel is nothing. Actually, kernel is everything in an OS, but for the understanding, I'll just explain that in simple terms, I can say that kernel is the, in simple term, I would say, when PPT. So I'll try to explain from this PPT. Yeah, so as we have discussed, what is Linux? Linux is not an operating system, is a kernel, is an open source, right? In the next thing, what is a kernel, right? So kernel is basically the set of programs or set of instructions. In simple definition, I can say that kernel is the heart of an OS, or the mind of an OS. Right? Every execution held by passing through the kernel. Whenever we give a command to our machine, so that command used to pass by the kernel and then they reach to the hardware or software, right? So kernel is, I can say, mediator between shell and the hardware, right? Kernel is basically a mediator between shell and the hardware. I'll show you a figure, and by that figure I hope you'll be clear that how kernel works and what, where kernel stands, right? So this is the entire structure of our machine, right? The outer layer is the user. We used to sit, we used to type, we used to give the instruction on outer layer, right? Or we used to sit here, right? We are the external part of the machine, I can say that, right? We used to give the commands in shell. Now what is shell, I'll discuss about the shell later. Okay, so for now, we used to type, we used to give the instructions in shell, right? So here shell, I can see that shell is a mediator between kernel and the user, right? Okay, now this is the kernel. Here the kernel lies, right? Kernel is the mediator between shell and the hardware, right? See, when we enter a command, when we give instruction, so we give instruction on shell, we type commands on shell. After pressing enter, right, after pressing enter, the shell forwards that instruction to kernel, and through the kernel that instruction go to the hardware, right? Yeah, so this process happens every time whenever we gives a command or instruction to the our machine. So we used to type the command on the shell, and the shell forward that instruction, forward that command to the kernel, and then accordingly, if that instruction belongs to the hardware, so the kernel send that instruction to the hardware, or if that command, if that instruction belong to the software, then the kernel send that instruction to the software, right? So this is how the kernel works. Kernel, so I can say that kernel works as a mediator between mediator between shell and the hardware. And kernel is also works as interpreter. I'll explain this interpreter thing later, that how it is an interpreter or converter. I can say it is an interpreter or converter, right? So here's the kernel lies. So kernel is the core part of an OS. I can say kernel is the core part, is the very core part of the OS, right? And it is a very important part of it. Is also a very important part, as I said, that this that kernel is called the mind of an OS, right? And the mind is a very important part of a body, of a human body, or anything, right? Yeah. So this is the kernel. Uh, as I said that whenever we give the command to our machine, whenever we give instruction to the machine, so we type the instructions on shell, and then shell forward that instruction to the kernel right here. See this this figure, right? So this is a user, right? Here we used to type in the shell in text language, right? Shell convert that instruction into ASCII codes and send to the kernel. So here shell is working as a converter of this to this, or I can say shell is working as a interpreter, right? And shell is also the mediator between user and the kernel, right? So here shell forward the that instruction given by the user in text language to ASCII codes, and it sends that instruction to the kernel after converting that instruction in ASCII codes, right? Then kernel forward those that instruction after converting into binary codes to the hardware. Okay, so here kernel lies here. So kernel is working as a as we can see mediator between shell and the hardware, and interpreter converter. Also it is interpreting the ASCII codes to binary codes, and also it is converting to ASCII codes to binary codes, because hardware understand binary codes, right? So this process held every time we give instruction on the shell. Yeah, and again, how we get the output, right? We get the output from hardware. So hardware gives the output to kernel in binary codes, right? Then kernel interpret that binary code to ASCII codes and send it to the shell. So the same process same process is again following in the reverse order, right? Now the output is coming from the hardware in binary codes, and it is coming to the kernel, and kernel convert those binary codes and to us in ASCII codes and send to the shell. Then shell convert those ASCII codes in text language and send to the user, and it's sent to the user in text language so that we can read that output in text language, and and we could understand that what the output is, right? So this process is execute every time we give the instruction to our machine, right? So this is how shell works. This is how the kernel lies between the shell and the hardware. So this is how we can see that what is the importance of the kernel, that if I remove this from this place, so you won't get any output, right? The kernel is doing the very important task here. Here it is converting the sky codes to binary code and then sending to the hardware, right? Apart from this, apart from interpreting and converting, uh, kernel has some more task, some more work to do. So more tasks like uh, basically I can say that kernel is the manager of our machine, right? it it used to the manage the process, or I can say process management, process. Oh, what? Just a second. Process management. The task of the kernel process management, time management. The time management means CPU time management. And apart from this, it is resources management and some more tasks which are related to management. So the basic. So So as I told you that kernel works as the mind of the OS. Kernel basically the mind of an OS. So it works for the intelligent tasks, right? Like time management, process management, resources management, memory management, CPU management, kernel management, and many more tasks are there, right? Okay. So here we got that that what is the kernel. So here we got some answers that what is Linux. Now I hope you can elaborate anyone that what is Linux. Linux is the kernel. Now what is the kernel? Also you can elaborate anyone that what the kernel is, right? Okay, now talk about shell. As I told you that we used to type the commands on the shell, right? So what is the shell? Shell is basically the interface where we type the commands, from where we give the instruction to the kernel, right? It is basically an environment. I can say that shell is in the core term, shell is an environment which gives us an interface to talk to the kernel, right? Shell is a mediator, shell is the environment, shell is the medium through which I can talk to the kernel. It is a mediator between user and the shell and interpreter. So I hope the shell is clear now, right? So here's the shell. Okay, now one more term I used to heard, and the full form of RHCSA is Red Hat Certified System Administrator. Now tell me what is Red Hat? Yeah, please. Now we know that what is Linux, what is kernel, what is shell. Now I'm asking what is Red Hat? A simple answer is here for Red Hat. Red Hat is an what? Is an operating system. Finally, we got our operating system, which is Red Hat. Okay, that Red Hat is an operating system. How can we say that? Look, what happens, how a operating system built. See, what happens, the the story behind of building the operating system. Actually, whenever any company wants to build an operating system, so first they take the kernel, right? So if I suppose this is a kernel, suppose this is kernel, right? Now what will, okay, from where they get the kernel? So our website is there. You can also download the kernel from this website, www.kernel.org. The latest stable version of the kernel is available here. Anybody can download this kernel and they can modify their own OS and they can distribute that. This is freely available in the internet because this is the open source, anybody can use it. Okay, so yeah, so I was in the story that whenever a company wants to build an operating system, so first they download the stable version of the latest stable version of kernel, right? After downloading the kernel, they add some applications, some programs, so that so that users can use that application, that the entire thing which I'll get at the end of the, and or I can say which will be the final product. So after downloading the kernel, they add some applications, some programs to that kernel, right? And after that, after modifying, or yeah, after modifying, they built a product that is called an OS. So I'll try to explain from this diagram. Yeah, so I told that suppose this is the kernel. So what companies do, they just download the kernel and they just add some more programs into the kernel. Suppose this, suppose some more. I have add this to my kernel, and suppose and some more things, some more programs I have added, right? So yeah, so now they'll made the entire product. Just a second. Just a second. Yeah. So this entire product. Just a second. Just a second. I'll just try to. Yeah. So yeah. So this entire product is called operating system, right? Look, this is the kernel. These are some additional programs, some additional applications. So now this entire product is called operating system. And then after creating the operating system, the company used to give that operating system a name, which is obvious, right? A name. That name can be anything. That name can be anything. Red hat, black hat, gray hat, anything. So the Red Hat company did the same thing. They downloaded, they got the kernel, they add some applications, some programs, and after adding some programs, they called their operating system what? Red Hat, right? So I hope you understand that what the Red Hat is. So Red Hat basically an operating system. Like Red Hat, there are thousands of operating systems are available in the internet for free of cost. You can download those operating system, and the companies did the same thing. They just downloaded the kernel first, and then they modified the kernel, they add some applications, some programs, and then they distribute that final product, and which we called operating system, and they have just assigned that operating system a name. Many examples are there: Red Hat, Ubuntu, Debian, Kali, many more are there. As I said, thousands of operating system are there. If you want to see the operating systems which are based on Linux, okay, you tell me one thing, that as I uh, name Red Hat, Ubuntu, sorry, Ubuntu, yeah, Debian, and some more operating system are there. What is the common thing among these operating systems? What is the common thing? Just think and answer me. What is the common thing among these operating systems? Linux. The kernel of these operating system is Linux. These operating systems are based on Linux, right? So this is the common thing among these operating systems. So I hope you are clear with the operating systems, right? Okay, so we used to call these operating system in Linux terms. We used to call these Red Hat, Ubuntu, Debian. We call these distributions. I can call it distros. It is distros, and we can call it flavors, which is a very common word in if you are in Linux field. Flavors, and so distributions, distros, flavors, or you can also call it operating system, which is very easy and very common word, right? So we can call these distributions, distros, flavors, operating system. So if you want to see that how many distros are available in the internet, then a website I'm sharing with you, you can see that the how many distros are available in the internet. The website is there, www.distrowatch.com. You please log in into that website, and you will get that how many, that so many thousands of operating systems are available there. You can download any one of them. These are free of cost, these are free to use, right? So you can download them and you can see that OSs are available in the internet for free, right? So I hope you are clear with the terms. Just a second, I'll just delete these figures. Yeah, so I hope you are clear with the term Linux. What is Linux? What is kernel? What is the difference between operating system and the kernel, right? What is the operating system between? What is the difference between operating system and the kernel? Actually, the question is wrong. My question is wrong. I should have asked that what is the link between operating system and the kernel? So what would be your answer? Your answer would be that kernel is a part of an operating system, right? We can't differentiate between kernel and the operating system because kernel is itself a part of operating system. So I can say, if anybody would ask you that what is the difference between operating system and the kernel, then you'll answer them that kernel is just a part of an OS, is just a core part of an operating system. It is a very important part of an operating system, right? So yeah, so I think all these terms are clear now. Yeah, so I'll just share some history of the Linux, of the Red Hat. The history of Linux is something like this. That Linux Linux introduced in 1991, right? Linux, the father of, I can say the founder or the father of Linux is Linus. A person is there called Linus. Um, oh, it is Benedict Torvalds. It is an American. So Torvald. Yeah. So the name of the father of the Linux is Linus Bandich Torvalds. He has discovered Linux in 1991, and and I'll share you a secret that how he has discovered Linux. He has stolen more than 90% of source codes from Unix. Yeah. Now, I hope you have heard about the Unix. Okay, Unix, right? Unix, I'll just share some history of the Unix and some differences of the Unix between Unix and Linux, and how I'll compare a bit about between Unix and Linux, right? So Unix, yeah. So Unix, if I discuss about the Unix, then I'd say Unix is discovered in 1969 by Dennis Ritchie, which is also, oh sorry, who is also the father of the C language. Yeah, right? Dennis Ritchie have founded the C language, and the same person, Dennis Ritchie, has founded Unix in 1969, and one more person is there, Dennis Ritchie and Kane Thompson. Right? So these two founded the Unix in 1969. Okay, so the important difference between Unix and Linux, many people don't know the difference between Unix and Linux, right? So I'll share a difference, an important difference between Linux and Unix, right? So Unix, as I said, Linux is a kernel, but Linux is a kernel, but Unix is an operating system. Okay, so this is the main difference between these two. Yeah, I can copy the source codes of Linux legally and modify and then distribute after modifying that. But in case of Unix, I cannot copy the source codes of that Unix, that operating system. Okay, so yeah, okay, so now come to the Linux. Right, Linux, I was telling you about Linux. Then Linux basically founded in 1991 by Linus Bandich Torvalds. Linux was an open source kernel. Okay, what is Red Hat? I'll just tell you a bit history about Red Hat. Basically, Red Hat, a company, two persons were there in America. Two persons. The name of those person was, as far as I remember, one is two persons were there in America. One person was Bob Young, and another was Mark Wing. These two persons founded the Red Hat Incorporation. Red Hat Incorporation is a private limited company registered in America. The first product was the first product of Red Hat Incorporation was Red Hat operating system. They founded Red Hat operating system in 1993. They launched the first version of Red Hat operating system in 1993, and they called it RHEL 1. And the version name of that RHEL 1 was Halloween version. Halloween version. Right? So this is, and after that, uh, the version was keep coming. later years, after L1, L2, L3, L4, 5, 6, and right now these days RHEL 7 is the latest version of the Red Hat Incorporation, and we are using Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7 as our current operating system of Red Hat. We'll be studying RHCSA course in RHEL 7 in the latest version of Red Hat. So it's gonna be very interesting. Yeah. So now I hope all of you are clear with the terms Red Hat, Linux, kernel, shell, and what else we have discussed. Yeah, so now I think I should move forward. That okay, so I think it's enough for this class, because as I told in the beginning that this class is basically the introductory class. I I have just given you the introduction of Linux and the things which are related to Linux. So I think it is enough for this class. And in next class, I'll be discussing some more basic concepts about the Linux, some basic commands, the installation part. Mainly, we'll be discussing the installation part of Red Hat 7 in your Windows machine or in your base machine. Yeah, we can install a different operating system on a different operating system through some applications called VMware and VirtualBox. So yeah, so I'll be discussing about the installation of the Red Hat in detail in next class. Yeah, it's enough for this class. So I hope the class was good and all the things were clear. If you have any doubt regarding the class, then you can ping me. You can ask me the questions. My email ID is guptaarpit6011. I'll be available for you to answer your questions regarding Linux. So you please note down my email ID, and you can send me the questions if you have any doubt regarding this class or regarding anything. Okay, so I'll see you in next class. Bye bye. Take care. Bye bye.